Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Dinner and a Game. We are gathered here for a Friday night, and this particular Friday night means we are going to be engaging in dinner conversations. Dinner Conversations is a show we created to talk about all kinds of topics that range the gambit all the way through the geek and gaming community. And this week's topic is one that's been popping up a lot in the community on TikTok, a lot in the last, about month and a half or so. It's been really getting hot again. It is become a topic that also has been circulating around even longer than that, ever since the massive popularity of a particular live play show called Critical Role. That topic is the Matt Mercer effect. Now, tonight, thankfully, I got some really great people to come in and join me with this conversation. First off, we have my good friend Ian, who is a veteran game master and has his own TikTok channel as well. You can go follow him here. And Ian and I have, I need to learn how to type with proper capitalization so it actually does what I tell it to do. There we go. Ian and I gamed together quite a while, way back in the day, until I moved away from San Antonio. And thank you very much for joining us, Ian. I really appreciate having you on.
Thank you for having me. My name is Ian Crone. You can follow me on TikTok at Comrade Simric. I discuss tabletop RPGs, sociology, and politics.
There you go. And we also have another TikTok creator and musical genius, Weston from Arcane Anthems. Weston, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing very well. I'm stoked to be here. Hi, everybody. My name is Weston, also known as Arcane Anthems. I write free RPG music, free to use in your public streams, games, campaigns, wherever you want to. I also do a lot of fun D&D based parodies on TikTok. I'm also on Instagram and Twitter and all over the place. Everything is just at Arcane Anthems. I've tried to make it as easy as possible to find me. My DMs are open. Reach out and say hello.
Yep, and we put both Ian's link to his TikTok and we put Weston's links to all his links up there. And also, if you happen to want to follow us here on Dinner and a Game, we also have our link tree up in chat where you can follow all of our different content, and we really appreciate it, as every creator does. We appreciate every single follow. We appreciate every single like. We mainly do this because we enjoy it. And we love the fact that we can reach out and get to and bring this to people and provide some enjoyment for them. It was really particular during COVID, but even now I really appreciate just having an audience at all. So now to get down to the actual nitty-gritty of the subject tonight, the Matt Mercer effect, for those of you who may not be versed in it, as I was saying before, started because of a show called Critical Role. Critical Role is an incredibly successful live stream tabletop RPG show that basically happened because Matt Mercer and his friends, who are all voice actors, had a D&D game they tried to play in as often as they could. And one of the members of that D&D game was friends with a particular other gaming royalty, Felicia Day. And they ended up getting into a partnership. Felicia Day was starting her own creative studio, and they brought in all the folks from Critical Role and gave them the platform to start streaming their D&D game. They made it into a weekly game, and it didn't just do well. It was, if I remember correctly, the first several shows were having so many technical difficulties because they had so many people showing up to watch the show that they were literally crashing their stream. So it was very successful from the get-go, and it only grew. Now, what this did was, this also coincided with the new advent of the golden age of D&D. Back in 2014, when Dungeons & Dragons said they were going to be releasing the new edition, and they started building out the Adventure League content and the Adventure League style of play, the D&D kind of exploded. And all of that this led up to Critical Role kind of being one of the vanguard programs for this new outpouring of love for our favorite hobby. Yes, Fox. Fox Rider is saying, a lot of times I see people complaining about the Matt Mercer effect when they can't compete, but it's often an excuse because they can't keep players, often because they're gatekeepers, but that's just some of the people I've interacted with. And that is a very specific scenario. There is also a lot of one of the other big things we're going to discuss is what the Matt Mercer effect means to different people within the industry. But first off, as I was saying, it coincides with the explosion of the popularity of D&D, the explosion of the popularity of the Matt Mercer show, and then it also leads into the fact that this has caused a huge influx in new players into the gaming community. And this has caused a lot of different sociological events within the gaming community, and the Matthew Mercer effect is one of those events that has kind of taken on its life of its own and almost become like an urban legend at this point. So, what do you guys think about, just as a general point of discussion, what do you guys think is the actual nature of the Matthew Mercer effect? Because everyone also has different opinions as to what it actually means.
I think it comes from, or if we were to like add a definition to it, whenever somebody says that, I think immediately of the player's expectations of their DM to have a very great grasp of voice acting, a good grasp of improv, a great grasp on world building, writing, all the things that Matthew Mercer tends to do really well. And they have this, from what I've heard, is that the players have this expectation of their DM to be good at all of those things, right? So that's kind of what the definition of it would be, in my mind.
Mm-hmm. What about you?
I would say it's also a double-edged sword, because I've noticed this in a lot of newer DMs. I DM a lot of Adventurers League, and part of the concept of Adventurers League is to introduce people to the hobby and to also foster new dungeon masters or game masters, if you will, because I believe this affects all of tabletop RPGs, not just D&D specifically. And I will see people who come in and they want to DM, they want to be the Grand Master, and they sit down on a table and they expect all the players to act like Critical Role. And I think this is a double-edged sword, because I think a lot of times we want to focus on the effects that it puts on the DM, but there is also a great amount of effect that it puts on the actual players. Mm-hmm. Because, it's like, I've said it before to people, like, your Dungeon Master is not Matt Mercer, but you're not Laura Bailey. Mm-hmm. So I think, though, I do believe the Mercer effect is a thing, is a sociological concept, and I'd love to go into that more, into its mimetic aspects. But I have thoughts about its negative impacts and its positive impacts to our hobby.
Yep. So one of the things that I've always thought of when I think of the Matthew Mercer effect is that I understand what a lot of people are trying to say when they're trying to throw out the Matthew Mercer effect. And something Fox Rider said was kind of what I'm kind of keying this off of. There's a lot of people out there who, when they feel like they have not done a good enough job, personal insecurities, maybe some other gamers have said something, that type of situation, in those situations they get very, very determined to find a reason for why they're having issues. And a lot of new gamers, because so many people have come to us from Critical Role now, and from podcasts and live streams in general, they come to us from that. A lot of people are saying that, these podcasts, these live streams, which have budgets and production values and production teams providing all the special effects and the contents and everything, they are saying that this sets an unrealistic precedent for people who just coming into a game store to play in a pickup game. And they're using that as a reason to say, I'm having real trouble GMing for people because I feel like I have to be at that level to provide them with entertainment value that's worthy of them coming in and spending an evening playing my game. And that doesn't happen as much with older veteran GMs, because you know, we've been around, we know what's going on, we know how much, we know right off the bat how much it would cost for us to have that level of table quality. Not even story, writing, nothing. I'm just talking about the terrain pieces, the gorgeously painted minis, all the set design, the lighting, the cameras, everything. That's ridiculous. That's not even conceivable.
I think the true magic of Critical Role comes into play because you can have, I'll point to movies for this. Mm-hmm. You can have the largest budget and the greatest actors. I'm trying to think of a movie for it right off the top of my head, like Battleship. That was a horrible movie. I think everybody agrees that was a horrible movie.
Yep.
But it had some very high production value. And does Critical Role have very high production value? Yes. But what I think people need to lean in on, and when we're talking to these less experienced dungeon masters or those interested in exploring becoming the dungeon masters, we have to say it's not about the quality of the table around you. Like, would I love a $15,000 Wormwood gaming table? You bet. Would I ever slide that past my wife? No. But at the end of the day, it's about the quality of people you have around you and the fun you're having. And I think part of the net negative effect of Critical Role is that you don't really focus on the bald guy who's like the head of TSO, who's like the head of WotC now. I can't remember his name. He used to run all the oh man, I'm so flustered. But he used to run all the Acquisitions Incorporated game.
Yeah.
He said that there were 3 pillars to tabletop RPGs. And I fully believe that. I think we really need to lean in on that as a community, training up these new dungeon masters. So the 3 pillars were exploration, combat, and role play. And I think you need to find your niche in that as a dungeon master. And I think that Matthew Mercer, while being very well versed in role play, I find his exploration to be a little bit lacking. And I think he gets away with a lot of things in combat because his players really aren't all about combat. Because, I know veteran players who could absolutely tear apart his monsters in 3 rounds, but, it makes for a great thing.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna pop in right there and say that's great. Like, we as players should be able to enjoy what certain dungeon masters are really good at, like. And what certain tables are really good at. The part of the magic of Critical Role is it showed people like, hey, people who enjoy acting or people who enjoy that role play aspect, like, hey, this game is not just for number crunchers, which is what 4th edition was. It was a number crunching, min-max paradise of, we're gonna fight these goblins for the next 3.5 hours. And some people love to play like that, and that's great. But I think it makes sense why 4th edition didn't take off in the same way that 5th edition did, because the accessibility of it is so much lower. So when you have somebody like Matthew Mercer or Critical Role or the Adventure Zone showing that the fun doesn't have to be in the number crunching for everybody. The fun can be in the storytelling.
Yep.
Right. And so that's something that I think that these newer age TTRPG media, brands do very well, is they focus on the fun you can have when you're telling stories with your friends. And then you get 5th edition where it's optimized for that storytelling idea. And you can, it makes perfect sense to me why there was this explosion. Not just in TTRPGs, but also in the board gaming community, and like this very let's sit around a table and have fun and play together again. Yeah. We're not going to the table to win this game. We're going to the table to enjoy the time that we have together. And you can see the amount of co-op games that are coming out, this like renaissance, and it's all about that human interaction piece.
Mm-hmm. And that also leads into another big change in the indie RPG community, where a lot of indie RPGs have moved away from dungeon master led games and have gone to dungeon master less games. and heavy narrative storytelling games. And you know, it's just another factor of the indie community trying to step away from just being another version of D&D. But because of that, and because of the amount of people who are coming in with shows like Critical Role or shows like the Adventure Zone, and the Adventure Zone is a great example, because when those guys started playing, they had no idea what the hell they were doing. They made up half the shit on the fly because it went well with the story they were telling. You know, and yeah, they got some of them. Well, one of them knew how to play the mechanics of the game, but the other two were kind of just like, I'm here to have fun and roll dice, and I don't even know what I'm doing, but I'm having a blast. And that just poured through the screen, poured through the audio, and you knew that they were enjoying themselves. And that's one of the big things that shows bring out, is because they do manage to capture that joy in the game that really also helps to draw in people. And it was another big reason that we have so many people coming over, because that's one thing that I think all these streams do well, and one thing that I even bother to stream at all is because I want to let people understand and know that the game is fun and enjoyable. And even though these people are, you know, like, and we'll keep on going back to Critical Role because of the Matt Mercer effect, but even though they're professional voice actors, and even though there is obviously some pre-knowledge of plot, story, and mechanics going forward, because you know of their ability to react to what's going on so well, there is a lot of that is always going to be on the ad-lib side, because you know Matt can't script anything. He can have a general concept of where he wants story to go, but he can't script anything. And a lot of people have complained about the Matthew Mercer effect by saying, well, it's, you know, their show is mostly scripted. They mostly know where they're going to go. And so he has this huge advantage because everyone knows what's going to happen at the table. And I'm just like, this is a mechanical game that has random shit that happens constantly. You can't. And even if they have an idea of, you know, let's get to like Chroma Conclave fight, let's get to X dragon by X date, they'll work towards that. But if story comes up, they're going to follow those trails. Perfect example of that, Travis Willingham with a deck of many things in Grog at the end of season 2. Spoilers, sorry. Spoilers for season 1 of Critical Role. But Travis just fully embodying the dumbass and pulling a fucking card randomly for no apparent reason other than he had it. And totally threw off almost the entire season with one action.
Yep.
You know.
Well, and I think that actually causes, because I look at every social effect, because the Mercer effect is very much a social effect within our space. But that's also one of the drawbacks to it, is that by seeing those players be that way, it informs newer players of how they're expected to act. So I see the Mercer effect much more negative on like newer players and what they expect from the table and how they're expected to act when they're at the table. So like a lot of my players in Adventures League pickup games will try these very outlandish things that would be very much more suited to a long-term campaign. Like we had this one where it was in a castle, and the guy was like, okay, I'm going to claim the castle as my property because I'm a noble. And I'm like, that doesn't really matter in Adventurers League. This is just a one-shot. We're just here to play a game a little bit. But, you know, in a long-form campaign would be very good. I think one of the cons to Critical Role is that it encourages certain behaviors to players that in the context of that game that the Dungeon Master is running may not fit. So I think that's why one of the things that, like, what we need to encourage new players to go to is more, and while I love Adventures League for an introduction to the mechanical side and to everything else, is that if they're really looking for something like Critical Role, they need to find a regular table. That's what they need to find. And I think within our space, we really don't have that robust recommendation system. Like, hey, this person has an open slot. There's loads of boards on it, but like you go to the art looking for group on Reddit, and half the posts are 3 days old or everything else. So I think what we really need to do is we need to start steering the new players towards long-form campaigns. So, and I think that's honestly what they want. Yeah. But also, Yeah, but also on the converse side, we need to train new DMs in the three pillars of TTRPGs, because a lot of them only know one aspect of it. So, such as in my life, I have someone I know who's very new to being a DM. He's only ever DM games, and he's very good at the role playing side, but he kept on complaining. He's like, I can never give stakes to my people. He goes, they get into combat and they just raffle stomp over everything. So like I had to take this newbie DM and teach them about how to make combat effective. I'm like, you can ignore the hit points as a DM.
Yep.
You can just completely ignore that.
Kyoto Kiyoshi just said that in chat, actually. He's like,
Yeah.
Pro tip, don't ever set your hit points until you know how much damage your PCs are doing.
Like, are the dice hot for them tonight and cold for you? And there's a reason the DM screen exists too, because I've had other players been like, oh man, I just completely murdered this player in this arc. I'm like, well, were you rolling behind the screen? It exists for a reason, not because you're cheating, but just because maybe it's not a good idea for your big bad evil guy to, critically hit on that level 5 inflict wounds right now.
You're in charge of the story. You're in charge of building a good story and making your. I think one of the great things that Matthew Mercer's ever said was you're in charge of making your players feel like heroes. Mm-hmm. And if you're just there behind the screen, just like destroying them, or just getting run over all the time, that's not the hero's journey. There's no struggle there. There's no tension.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and that's something that new GMs come in and they often struggle with, because G&D has one very blaring error in its system, and that's the concept of CR. The CR does not work. It is not mathematically usable to determine a threat level of a creature versus a party.
And I think that's one of the big misunderstandings in the game, is that people think like, oh, this party is this, therefore I'm going to put them up against this one monster, and this one monster will be able to hold its own, right? But that's not how games are supposed to work. You're supposed to like slowly wear down your party. You're supposed to, and these things aren't really said anywhere, right? Mm-hmm. If you have a single monster, the action economy doesn't favor that monster.
Nope.
The players are going to have like even a CR 18 could be absolutely destroyed by 6 level 4s, because the action economy is so much in the player's favor. So like these are things that new DMs just don't know, or GMs just don't understand. These are concepts that are later down the road you figure them out.
Well, yeah, and plus, a lot of times this isn't really well explained, and this is on Wizards of the Coast. It's not really well explained how to plan these things out, such as, I usually tend towards, like, I look at the narrative struggles. Like, you never see a competent big bad evil guy. Let's take Star Wars, for instance. Like, because I love Star Wars. When Anakin and well, first off, they built the tension because they built how badass Yoda was. And, they built up how badass Count Dooku was. But when Anakin and Obi-Wan, the movies are 20 years old. Don't at me if I'm spoiling them for you. When they faced on Count Dooku, what had they just done? They just fought gladiatorial combat in arena. They just chased this guy down. And Count Dooku was like, I haven't used any of my force points. Let's do this. So, I mean, you kind of have to put that struggle in there. So that way when the heroes do finally overcome the big bad evil guy, it was Palpatine all along, there's that struggle there. There's that sense of accomplishment.
Yeah.
And I do believe that the Dungeon Master's Guide doesn't do a good enough job to explain that, because Matt Mercer gets away with that for a few reasons, because people take a lot of cues off him. When you watch a lot of his fights, and I'm not meaning to talk smack about Critical Role, so if anybody adds me in anything, as much as I love Travis and as much as I love Laura Bailey, I love watching them roleplay, they're clueless when it comes to tactics.
Travis has gotten better in the new season.
Yeah, he actually
has.
No.
He is a horrible Hexblade. He's a horrible Hexblade. I have a Hexblade with half the magic items built almost the same exactly way, and I way output more DPS than he does with Ford. But anyways, I haven't seen the latest episode, so maybe he's improved. But it's just Travis can get away with that because he understands his players. He understands his players aren't very tactically minded. You know, they're not going to do the optimum choice at the time, and that comes with knowing your players. And you know, other things that Matt Mercer doesn't go into as a primer for D&D, such as the session zero, gauging things for your players. So if I was going to sit down with Ray at a table, I'm probably going to be much more tactically proficient with my big bad evil guy because Ray's going to bring some tactical proficiency to it. Whereas if I'm sitting down at an AAL table with a whole bunch of 11-year-olds, I'm not going to throw that much tactical proficiency at them, you know? And, you know, it's also allowing the players to role play outside of things because, like in our Avernus campaign, I played a Goblin Barbarian. I had no idea of tactics. I just got angry and smashed things. But when our tactical player was out for that session, you know, the DM allowed me to give tactical advice because even though it was something that my character wouldn't do, I understood we were in a tactically bad situation as the player. And I just told the other players, this is what we need to do. I think one of you is smart enough to figure this out.
Yeah.
So I wasn't, but
so
but
and
you know what? Go ahead.
No, and the reason I kind of brought in the mechanics of it all is because when new players see the encounters that are put forth in the Critical Role show, that's one thing I think Matt has he has strength on. And I don't know what tactics he actually uses as a GM. He may, you know, do the whole thing of, like we were saying, he may gauge the challenge based on what he needs for drama. So therefore, like, if he doesn't need the monster to die at that point, the monster doesn't die. But he makes sure to set the challenges that the characters are facing to be based around what he needs for the next step, for the next stage. And that's something I think he does really, really well. But it also will look at new GMs who are coming in, they're looking through the books, and they're trying to analyze everything, and they're trying to crunch the numbers, and they're like, this doesn't add up. That thing should have been dead like 4 rounds ago. None of this adds up. And they get really confused, and then that's when you get things like, well, Matt Mercer cheats. It's like, the GM can't cheat!
Yeah. I reflect back to when I first started playing, and I am one of the Critical Role generation. You know, I started in 2015. I had never played D&D my entire life. Had never even touched it. And I'm and here I am, like brand new to the hobby, right? Watching this show, listening to Adventure Zone. And I have a group of friends who all play board games together. So I bring up this idea of like, hey, we should probably play D&D. They all scoff and laugh at me, because at the time now it's a completely different face. Like people understand what it is now. I feel like have a much better idea of what it is. But at the time, they didn't. They just like, wow, Weston, that is really, really nerdy. So I warmed them up to this idea of playing D&D with some other RPGs in a box. We played Mice and Mystics together. I did it in a way that is very like role playing. We're like, hey, how would your character respond to this? Like, what do you think they're gonna do? And then they were like, oh, we kind of get it. We want to play D&D now, and we've been playing since 2015. So like that. The reason I bring that up is that I, as a beginner DM, had suffered a lot of these pitfalls. I mismanaged a lot of my encounters, but at the time, like this is coming from me, I was a stage performer. I was a lead singer in a rock band. Like I know how to be in front of people. I know how to tell a story. Mm-hmm. And I leaned really heavily on that. Well, one of the things that you all have brought up earlier that obviously Critical Role does well and that the entire cast does well is role playing. And I, in wanting to teach my friends how to role play, how to act, and how to enjoy each other's company in this new way, in this what can be very uncomfortable way. We haven't, played since we were kids. We hadn't made believe since we were kids. And there was one person at the table in particular who I pushed a little bit too hard to role play. And this player wasn't there for that. It made them uncomfortable. And because of that, I have since learned, like, some people don't mind if their friends are, acting and those kind of things, but they just want to be there. They like rolling dice. They like, casting spells. They like being there for those reasons. So as a new DM, I didn't really get that because it wasn't how I wanted to play the game, right? And that was definitely impacted by this new age D&D idea, this Matthew Mercer effect idea. And I have since learned the type of games that I like to run, the types of players I like to play with, where it's the most fun for me and the most fun for them. And it's important that we don't alienate people who have a different way of enjoying the game.
Yes.
So I wanted to share that anecdote with you.
No,
Well, that's one of the reasons why I think one of the most important concepts really to be brought to the forefront, and there's actually a lot of traffic on it on TikTok, is the idea of a session zero.
Mm-hmm.
Which the idea of a session zero where you can lay all that out, where the Dungeon Master screen is down and the Dungeon Master can say, I'm going to run this type of game. I want to do this. Or, does anybody have any problems with that? You set expectations and boundaries as to what people are and are not comfortable with. Such as, and sometimes you can get people to break out of their shell if they know that's coming. Such as in my Saturday night game, which is completely hosted online, one of my players, he is a musician. And, but he never performs publicly. So I just pinged him on the side and I was like, hey, if your character does this, if you perform for us in character, your character does this, I'll give you a special reward, just to reward your courage. And, this character was not a really heavy role player. I'm like, but if you don't want to do this, that's fine too. I just want you to let you know, we all appreciate you here. We've heard a little bit of your music. We'd like to hear more. And the character's playing a bard, so it's not completely out of character. So the character, a few sessions later, gave us a 5-minute performance and confronted their stage fright in that way. And I think the video's frozen, but I see smiles from Weston, so I think Weston's positive about it. So, I think one of the primary components we have to remember about this game is that at the central part of this game with the leveling up system is the concept of growth. So should we take our players like shyness and maybe a little bit of their, I don't quite get this aspect of the game, I don't really do well at this aspect of the game part of it. Yes, we should take that in consideration, but we should still challenge people to grow, because one of the great things I find about the Matt Mercer effect, or as I think it's more correctly called the Critical Role effect, is that us beardy game masters like me and Ray, even though I shaved my beard, we've been stuck in a single way of playing for a long time. And, Matt Mercer says, hey, you should do this. This is really fun too. So I think, while yes, we should mold the game towards the way we want to play it, and everybody at the table agrees, we should still challenge ourselves too. So that way, we can still grow and even run a better game. Because even though I just criticized Matt Mercer for his combat encounters, they are way better now than they were in Season 1, because he has been challenging himself to provide better combat encounters to his players. So, sorry, that was a rant.
No.
No, it's great. I love that, we can look at each. I feel like if anybody were to really study anybody else's, DM habits or the ways that they play, they could take away a lot of great moments. I love how you set this up. I love and as a gaming community, I think that's really where we can have the most good happen, is when we are pulling from each other's bests. And trying to include those things in our own games, and then also this idea, and we had brought it up earlier, about being a DM and how self-loathing that job can be, when after each session you're asking yourself, was that good? Was that fun for my players? Did they even enjoy it? What did I do something wrong? There's always this lingering fear. Did I do something wrong? Did I mess up? Was that boring? I think every DM has that in their head. So when you see somebody who is as good as these now professional DMs, these professional actor DMs, it really gets in your head because you want your players to have as much fun playing with you as you see those DMs players having with them. Does that make sense? That was a very weird way to say that.
No, it does.
You want to see the joy you perceive in a stream game or a podcast game reflected in your own game.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I think that there are, like, I would love to watch Wes's table just to see what I could get from him, and just to see the way he does things. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I mean, and it's just, it's always best to take a step back and look at what you're doing, but it's also a good habit to step back and look at what someone else is doing, not in a way of let me make sure I'm better than them, but in a way that's let me see what they're doing, because there could be some lessons I could learn here. So I mean,
oh God, sorry.
Go ahead, Brett.
No, I was gonna say and when I was in Houston, I participated in there was a lot of people there who wanted something different than Adventures League. So they started their own, basically a very large West Marches game. And they had like multiple GMs running congruent storylines that could interact with each other, affect each other. We had GM meetings every weekend. But one of the things they did that when I first started there, I was kind of like, because they would actually make anyone who wanted to run games for this group come in and run a game that had at least 2 or 3 of the participating GMs in the game as players. And that gave everyone a chance to give an evaluation of what they thought of their GMing style, whether it was something that was going to fit in what we were looking to do, because it was a very, once again, heavy story game and a very heavy RP situation with, and we had to work so hard to coordinate everything and make sure that all the GMs weren't taking story from another GM and like totally trashing it. We had a Discord that was insanely active. It was the reason it stopped in the end is because it was a hell of a lot of work. Yeah. But that was kind of something that was really neat, and I really would love to see is like GMs running for GMs.
Well, I think that actually brings up another really good point within the RPG community, and it brings up the concept of vetting, because what your GMs were specifically doing was they were vetting other GMs / players. And I do believe that that is something that's not really seen on Critical Role as far as the tabletop RPG space, is you actually spend a lot of time vetting. Like, trying to remember how we met, Ray. I think it was just random it wasn't Facebook. That was ages ago, before Facebook was really huge.
Yeah.
I think we just met at a game store, and you'd actually brought me to your house, and I knew the specific reason was to vet me. Like, am I a creepy guy? Am I this? Am I that?
Well, I think you also came in a bad time into that group, because that one's when we had to actually ask another guy to leave, because he asked us if he when we started playing with us, he asked us if we minded if he drank while we gamed. And we were like, no problem. And his idea of drinking was to show up after he'd already had a 6-pack with a case and go through the case in the course of a night. So, wow. So that's why you got kind of like grilled.
I don't envy his liver.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, it's just one of those things where, like, there's all these processes, and I think this is where, even though a lot of the beardy game masters are kind of looking at this influx of new people, which is a net positive thing, it's just a lot to manage and a lot for us to deal with as a community. I think that we have to kind of start training these newer players, because they may land at my table, and my table, is an inclusive table, and it is, I like to think it's a good table. But, how do they suss out whether or not they're at a bad table? How do they suss out whether or not that, like, I don't really want to play with this group, because they don't really get to see that that tabletop RPG experience with Critical Role. I mean, as much as I would love to, have a epic 2-year campaign with my friends, most TTRPG games last maybe a year because real life gets in the way. It just does.
Yeah.
Such as I played at Ray's table for a while, and then he had to move to Houston, and then I had to go find a new group. And I think that there's a lot of cultural things that a lot of the newer gamers are not being trained on, and that I have to train them on. As a more beardy DM, not cultural things is in like we're misogynist and sexist here, but more like, hey, when you first enter into a group, kind of weigh the table first and see if everybody else acts this way before you do, because you could have accidentally wandered into a more combat heavy group. Like something that like I noticed some players wanted from me as a DM that I was not comfortable as giving, but is quite common in Matt Mercer's games and Critical Role, was the romance aspect. I am not comfortable role-playing romance. I'm very comfortable romancing my wife, but it's just kind of cringy to me when I have to do it for other people, because I can't disconnect the person. And like I had to sit down and talk to them like, listen, I know your character wants a romance, I know you kind of want this, but this is something I don't feel comfortable providing. So I think the biggest thing we have to do with all these new people is set reasonable expectations for what's going on at the table.
Yeah, and that's once again part of the session zero. The funny thing is, session zeros are, before they were called session zeros, they existed. Some people did them, some people didn't. But they are becoming a mainstay so much that there are certain games now that are out there that literally, as part of this is your character creation process. As part of the character creation process, it's literally laid out as a session zero. Like, and I'll use one of my favorites as an example, Powered by the Apocalypse. There are multiple different types of Powered by the Apocalypse games. We're setting up one for Thursday nights. We're going to be playing City of Mist, which is a really interesting setup because you're basically all playing. It's a modern urban RPG, and you're all playing people who are basically awakened avatars of gods or legends or myths, anything like that. So it's kind of a wild setup. But you build your characters as a group. You create character interconnectivity for the backstories as a group. You create the city you're going to be playing in as a group. And and of course, as part of all this, we use the checklist for consent in gaming that was put out by, oh my gosh, who was it? It wasn't Monty Cook, was it?
It was Monty Cook.
It was Monty Cook.
I know that sounds weird to say Monty Cook did that. Yes, Monty Cook did that.
Yes, Monty Cook, the same guy who wrote the the sex compendium for D&D back in the 90s. That same Monty Cook put out the consent in gaming questionnaire.
And it's very thorough. Like,
yes,
he did a great job with it.
Yep. But yeah, so it's becoming such a ingrained part of our community that a lot of new games that are being developed literally just bake it right into their systems, which I think is an amazing step forward and amazing ideas that have become now part of the meta of our community.
Yeah, I just what I think would really help out with the driving the importance home of the session zero is I would really like it if in next campaign, because campaign 2's, from what I've heard, is rolling to an end soon. I'm like 40 episodes behind on Critical Role. But I think it would be best if like Matt Mercer showed how a session zero is supposed to be run. And
he's definitely brought that up in the past, where he's actually said like, hey, I have already had interactions with these characters. They started campaign 2 at level 2 because he had already run sessions with them where they got through that level 1 and they came into the game, having connected some of these dots. And this is really interesting because it's crazy to think that even these actors, these professional actors, need time for their characters to like develop. Like they need to get to know them and like know who they are, and that's why he did it off camera. Because he said like, hey, because I think Matthew Mercer, obviously, he realizes that it's a show. Like this is not just their home game anymore. This is a show, and he wants it to be entertaining. And they're all actors, so to be entertaining to them is fun. Like they enjoy being entertaining, and not everybody is that way. So that's one of the reasons that he didn't do that. And I completely agree with you. I think that showing the community that, like, hey, this is how a Session Zero looks with these professional actors as they learn their characters. And it doesn't have to be like on their Thursday night at 7 o'clock show. It can be at a different time. It's like, as a, an appendium to the actual show, right? But I think that's a great idea. I think that would set that, really ingrain that in the culture. That's a great idea.
And
I was like, Weston, just a personal message. SAS Scottish Anarchy says he loves your songs on TikTok, Weston.
Oh, thank you so much.
Sorry about that, Ian. Go ahead.
No, thank you. That means a lot to me. I put a lot of heart into those songs. So thank you very much.
Oh yeah, your music is fantastic. I'm constantly envious of anybody who can do music because I've just had a very hard time with it. I can read tabs though, so
hey, that's real good. Guitar's a lot of fun.
So, but one of the things I would stress is I think in order for Critical Role to increase its positive impact, because I do believe it's been a net positive impact to the TTRPG space, is I would really like it if Matt Mercer or someone else showed how the soup is made. Because a lot of people don't realize how the soup is made. On my TikTok, I'm probably going to start up the series again since I went from 100 followers to 6,000 followers now. About how to be a lazy DM, because there's so much mental and sometimes emotional energy put into preparing the campaign, preparing the next thing. And I'm a huge believer of, like somebody said, like, oh, I'm a newbie DM, what should I do? I go, you look at some descriptions of some campaign books printed by Wizards of the Coast, and you buy that, you run that. I go, it takes so much work off of you that you're not prepared to do. You are not prepared to do this work right now. And that's not a bad thing. And I think we have to just, I think if Matt, because I highly suspect Matt Mercer is a lazy DM too. I highly suspect that if he could show like, hey, I steal from here. Hey, I got this from here. Because I believe every DM should be two things. One, a masochist, and two, a thief. Steal from everything.
Yes. Every artist should be a thief. Every writer should be a thief. Every musician should be a thief, right? Like we play on each other's best things. I love that. That's fantastic.
Well, because like one of my favorite book series is Robin Hobb's The Realm of the Elderlings. I don't know if anybody else has read that. Mm-mm. But the Six Duchies, seriously, buy the books. They're good. It starts with Assassin's Apprentice. Fantastic book. But like if you look at the map, it's very apparent that the Six Duchies, where most of the story is set, is just an upside down Alaska. Robin Hobb, she just stole the map of Alaska and turned it upside down. And I
think any good architect.
Yeah. And like I think more DMs need to be encouraged to be lazy. Like, don't tread ground that's already been tread, and put some work on the players too. Like, I did this to a character that I was recently running a game for. I set out the basis of the world, and he's like, I'm playing an elf fighter, and I want to be a soldier. He goes, tell me about the Elven Empire's military. I'm like, I don't know. You tell me about it. He goes, what? I go, well, you tell me about it. You're the first example of a player playing an elf soldier in this world. You have to tell me about it. And then you tell me about it, and I just throw in some interesting things in there and turn it on its head. So, and like, I think DMs think that all this work is what Matt Mercer's doing, but I highly suspect he's not. I highly suspect that he is putting work on all the other players to really define on what their organizations are or how their characters' places in the world. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to encourage more lazy DMs and just Session Zero.
Yeah. There's a GM, Michael. He's on TikTok. He's been on the show too, and he was saying the other day on one of his TikToks that he thinks that everyone can create as they want to, right? But one of the things that he was saying is a lot of people feel intimidated about running homebrew content because they feel like they have to have everything detailed. They have to have every country made. They have to have every town in every country, every NPC in every town, all detailed out. And he was like, no, don't bother. He's like, you start out with one city, one town, one place where they begin. Build their connections there. Let them grow it out. Make the NPCs as they're needed. Do everything you need to do for that. They will create the plot for the entire game, because they will make enemies. They will make allies. They will build on this whole situation. And as a GM, all you have to do is sit back and watch, and then take and pluck what you want out to use for your meta, and then put together a huge story based on the actions your players are already taking. They're walking you through the story. They're giving you the story. All you have to do is build on what they give you.
I love that. I mean, my first game was a homebrew game because I have mild dyslexia, ADHD. Reading is really difficult for me. It's tough. It's extremely difficult for me. So for me, running a homebrew game is easier than running a module, which is like so backwards from a lot of other people I know. And I'm sure there are other people out there who feel very similar to the way that I do. Like I have learned to have a confidence in my ability to come up with what is needed when my players need something. Like I just ran a game on Thursday or last Tuesday, a couple days ago, and the ending of that game was nothing like I had planned for. They didn't visit any of the rooms that I had planned for them to happen, but I knew that I wanted to finish the game in a certain amount of time. So the actions that they took, just like you were saying, Ray, dictated where this story was going to go. And I just threw in little bits of improv. I threw in some of the puzzles that I had already brought up in some of the other rooms. I just moved them on over. These are tricks that all lazy DMs use, like, so that they can they can prepare their content and they can still use their content without having to railroad their players, essentially.
And one of the best things. One of the best things that happens off of that is when you get to that point and you reveal the big boss, and the big boss does his monologue and tells them how everything was connected and everything like that, and your players go, "Man, that was amazing! How did you predict all this?" And you're like, "It's a secret."
I'm just that good.
Yes. The truth is, you did all.
When it comes to things like this, I like to pull a trick from other writers of podcasts I've listened to. I think I heard this initially from Peter V. Brett. I don't know if you've ever read the Warded Man trilogy, but I highly actually 5 books, the Warded Man series, but it's extremely good. But one of the things he talked about on his blog is about how he doesn't plan where the particulars are. He plans what he wants to happen. And then, the characters react to that. So I think, one of the things that you need to do as a DM is in your OneNote or in your notepad when you're planning out the session is you need to say, I want these things to happen. And what happens from there is how the players react to it.
Absolutely.
Just make some bullet points, build your encounter. If you're going to have an encounter, you're like, I want these things to happen. And they happen. And this is just part, again, of being kind of lazy a little bit, being like, I don't want to have to write out this big, long, complicated module. I just want these things to happen. And since I already have a map and a little bit of prep, I can just fill it out as I need to go. Because your players aren't really going to fault you if 5 sessions later you don't remember the guy who ran the herb shop. It's, because like, ideally, like, who's the guy who ran the herb shop? I don't know. Make a history check. I rolled a 10. Well, you don't remember me either because he was just some random vendor. Wasn't really that important.
Yep.
So, and such as something I said to Foxwriter in the chat there real quick is he said that he'd been overcomplicating world building, and one of the most important things DMs have to realize is that you should discover things with your players.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Things should surprise you.
Yes.
When they happen in game, because you're a player too.
Can I bring up something that if you're done with your idea, Ian?
Yeah.
One aspect to the Matthew Mercer effect isn't in low-level games, though. It's once we kind of move past those low levels and we move into higher-level, bigger world type games, right? So one thing that I want to bring up is when we are running games with players who have very high level abilities and abilities that allow them to move through planes, through, once you get into this idea of this outer lore of D&D, this is where it actually does become difficult, because Matthew Mercer has been playing D&D for a very long time. It is apparent to me that he has read many books. He has researched the Shadowfell and the Feywilds and the Celestial Realms and Avernus and the different elemental planes, and like that as a as a DM for me is still like tricky. Like, okay, what does the elemental plane of fire even look like? Like, what would that even be? And one thing that I have taken away is like, well, Weston, it's whatever you want it to be. Like what do your instincts tell you that it is? And that's something that DMs learn over time. And what I always encourage people to do for new DMs is to follow those instincts. Because even though you think that it's going to sound trivial or trite, because those are the brain cells that you have and that you have with you all the time, those little trite thoughts are things that have been built over the course of your entire life. And you're not having the same thoughts as your players who have had a completely different life from you. Absolutely. So it's important to trust that, like, your adventure saving this prince from a demon is going to be very different for each person at that table. They're not going to be able to accurately predict exactly what you're thinking.
Yep.
If that makes sense, but there's this aspect of the Matthew Mercer effect where, like, he really knows, like, the extended world, and like I think the one of those things you brought up, grog, right? And he pulls the card, and Matt just kind of, I don't know if he was like, oh, I've been studying this outer plane, this is where they're gonna go, or like what he did there, but sent them to I completely forget the plane now. It was
Elysium.
Was it Elysium? I thought it was.
It was either Discord or Elysium. I can't remember offhand.
Howling Winds. Anyway, yeah,
it was a neutral-ish plane. But anyway, sorry.
No, it's fine. I'm trying. I can't remember it now. And then he was like, well, this is like, I guess I need to really study up on this. Figure out what this place is. And anyway, so I think that is an aspect that I'd love to hear your thoughts on.
I think a lot of there are a couple things in this. One, I'm pretty well versed in the D&D canon because I've been doing this since 1998, and even before 1998, when I grew up with parents very much in the Satanic Panic, I read most of the fiction books that were published by TSR. Wizards of the Coast, if you're listening, you need to do that again. But anyways, it's so, like, I'm very well steeped in the lore that is Dungeons and Dragons. Like, I could tell you things about Avernus and all the different planes that are there. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think if Dungeon Master's cornered, I think it's all right for you to say, like, hey, I don't know much about this. Give me 5 to 10 minutes. Let's take a break. You guys can go out and have a smoke. If you smoke, you can go use a restroom, go play some, Dance Dance Revolution, whatever. And just give me 5 or 10 minutes because I was not expecting it to be here. And that's a very okay thing to do. Like, because, like, you kind of have
pandemonium. Sorry. Okay.
Which is a very appropriate thing to do with pandemonium. Just
sorry, Ian, go ahead. Pandemonium. That's what it was.
That's okay. So, like, as in my Saturday night game, I decided to run a hardcover. It was Rime of the Frost Maiden. Now, not to talk smack about the writers of that, but it's not a very well put together hardcover. It's one of WotC's weaker hardcovers for 5th edition. And, like, I was kind of reading through it, and I was like, okay, this part's kind of boring. So I just, they had the hag there at a certain part of the adventure, and my players decided to make a deal with the hag. This was not an option that was written in the hardcover. So all of a sudden, like, they're going down this road that I had not prepared for, that their hardcover not prepared for. So I just stopped the game and go, guys, I think it's time we take a bathroom break. I go, because I need 10 minutes to wrap my head around this and decide and kind of decide how the world's going to react. And I think you need to feel comfortable with that as a DM, and players don't criticize your dungeon masters when they got to do that, because not everybody is quick on their feet like that, and not everybody is as steeped in the lore as others. Like, yeah, sure, I've been doing D&D since 1998, but like I couldn't remember the difference between Pandemonium, Elysium, and Discord. Which are three major planes in the Planescape Planescape topology that I couldn't remember.
Yep. And the other thing is, and I said this to Foxrider a little while ago, if you're running the game, if you're taking that time and you're spending that energy to create this for these people, you're making a really big sacrifice. And whatever you create to make this happen for them is valid. If it doesn't match with canon, it doesn't matter. Whatever you make to provide enjoyment to others is completely valid.
Oh yeah, my local AL shop, since I'm the one who knows a lot about canon, when another DM gets asked a canon question, they will come over to my table and ask me, hey, do you know about this? And I'll give them like a 5-minute spiel about the canon of that in the Forgotten Realms. And they'll be like, okay, what should I do here? And I'm like, just do what you want, man. I'm like, that's the story I read when I was 16. I go, what does it really matter? How do you think it matters? I go, I'm 41. That was like 25 years ago. It's your game. There's a multiverse and it exists for a reason.
Yep.
And
always remember, there is... Okay, so Matt Mercer has 2 published books, source books for the lore for his world. This is not to be intimidating, but this is just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. There are 229 novels written for Forgotten Realms. That does not count source books or modules, anything else. Just novels. And all 229 novels are canon. So we're talking about 229 300-plus page books that are all canon.
Right.
So if there is too much lore out there, and Ian and I are encyclopedias of freaking lore, because I think I've read about 150 of the novels, and I've got I still have all my Forgotten Realms source books over on the shelf, and I have the old maps and everything like that. But the thing is, I still won't remember everything. And I still won't get everything right. But if I'm running a game for you and I decide on something, and I say this is what it is, and you go look it up later, it is not wrong. It's what I'm doing.
Yep.
And that's another thing about Matthew Mercer that he did really, really well. Is he created these source books to represent his world, the Tal'Dorei source book and the new Wildemount source book. And in both of the books, in the very beginning, he literally says, this is just a guide and a reference. Whatever choices you make when you run your game are canon for your world. When you pick up this book, it is only guidance for you and reference for you. Whatever else you do, this is yours.
Well, because I even heard, I was listening into a Tal'Dorei game on Discord because a friend of mine was running it. And I even heard one of the players saying well, that's not canon because according to this episode with Matt Mercer, and it was kind of like, oh God, are we Trekkies now? And, I just kind of pinged him on the side. I was like, just tell him it's your world. Just tell him you like it better this way. And that Matt Mercer wouldn't care. And he came out and said that, and the other guy was like, well, okay.
Yep.
And
yep, absolutely. Yep.
I mean, it's just one of those things where you have to take into consideration that this is a creative outlet for everybody. Even like I mentioned, I was running Rime of the Frost Maiden. I'm completely almost off book now. Ariel's not even in her castle in the floating sea. I put her in the Netherese city. I've leaned into the Fae aspect, which isn't even part of the book, and I'm completely off book now. And that's fine because I was just like, this is horrible. Okay, well, I'm gonna do it this way.
Oh yes, sorry about killing all your vampire gnolls.
That's all right. That's all right. They weren't even really an encounter. I just built that encounter.
I figured as much.
Because I was just like, hey, this creature's in here, but it doesn't show up anywhere in the book. And I like vampire gnolls. That just sounds awesome. And that encounter wasn't that well. Well, no, I KO'd 2 players. I didn't kill them. I KO'd them. So I consider that a successful encounter because the players are nervous about it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, but no, I mean, there's a there has to be a creative side for the dungeon master, even if I'm encouraging you to be lazy. And you have to be prepared to go off book, and you have to also be prepared to, like, I've even ended a session before where it's like I just sit down and be like, I'm not prepared for this at all. So we've got 2 more hours. I'm just going to end it here, and let's bust out Settlers. Let's play some Settlers, and next week we'll pick up from where we're at. Most players should be willing to do that, because even though Critical Role is not strictly scripted, the players at that table understand enough about acting to take direction cues from Matt. So that way they know how not to act out of sorts too badly. Now I'm sure the players on Critical Role still, surprise Matt from time to time. He has to deal with that.
Absolutely.
But for the most part, they're able to, like, read that subtle language about, where's the what here's what I have prepared. Much like the director's like, this is what I want from you in this scene, and I don't want to have to describe it to you. You should just do it. So
I've definitely seen that multiple times where sometimes the players will be like, oh, do they have any greetings in this city? That, like, of course, like, Matt hasn't thought of, like, greetings that these people would have for each other. But then other times, and sometimes Matt will be like, oh yeah, it's this thing that I just came up with, and it's a brilliant idea, and it sounds amazing. Other times he'll be like, roll a history check, or either giving himself more time, or being like, they say hi to each other, like, what do you want from me,
or he'll glare at Travis and know that Travis is once again fucking with him.
Or Sam.
Or Sam, yes.
Most of the time it's Sam. But I love this idea, Ian, of how honest you are with the players at your table. That's fantastic. I'm a horrible liar with my players. I mean, by horrible I mean I'm very, very good. I'm a very good liar with the players at my tables, and I think that's a skill. Like, that's a skill that I've developed so that my players don't know when I'm making something up and when I have things totally under control and they're following my path. Or I like to have them going right down my path and act like they are surprising me. Like, wow, that was that was such a good, like, thing that you just did there. And, like, that ability to, I'm not being condescending, but that ability to let them either tell the story or not know the difference between them telling the story and me telling the story is a very powerful tool that Matt utilizes all the time.
Yeah.
And that ability, and Ian, I'm sure you're very, very good at this as well. I'm not saying that you're not. I love that as a DM, you have the ability to also say, like, hey, I want this to be really good for all of you. So I'm going to take a beat, and I'm going to really study up on this. Depending on where your mental state is, depending on if that idea came to you right away, or if you need a little bit of time. I did want to give the opposite impact of what that might look like as a DM. But I love that there have been times in my campaigns as well where I've been, like, playing for literally 25 minutes. And they did something that was so outlandish that I was like, I think I need some time to, like, think about what this is going to do in this world. So I really appreciated that, Ian. That was awesome.
Well, I mean, you have to be honest with the players too. Plus, if you're honest with them at times, I know this is going to sound bad, and people are probably going to call me a con artist. If you're honest enough, they'll buy into your lies.
Yeah.
Which is very important, because in a lot of situations you have to lie as a dungeon master, especially when you're playing as NPCs and everything else. Or sometimes they'll actually succeed at a role, but you're like, oh, I don't want you to know this right now. oh, I don't want you to know this right now. You're going to forget this in 5 or 6 sessions. So I'm going to lie and say you didn't meet the DC. It's that esoteric.
Sure.
And it's like, you have to have that rapport with them. And I kind of hate it if my players are watching this because I put it all over the Discords. But some have to have them for their own good. So that way, they still have a fun experience. So that way, the curtain's not pulled back too early. Like, it was Old Man Withers all along. Like, no, I don't want you to figure it out quite yet. So
Sure.
you have to be a little bit of a con artist to be a DM sometimes.
Absolutely. You do.
And one thing someone in chat just said, it was Lavender Voski. It was saying that she was asking what if the actors and the guys in Critical Role had any experience in improv, and I was saying that they're professional actors, voice actors, and she was saying that they may be pro actors at any rate, but being able to improv is a skill that takes work. A lot of people that look for games to be like Critical Role overlook that, in my opinion. And I was saying that is very, very true. Improv is a hell of a lot of work. And it's sometimes, there's great people who it's just a natural thing that occurs for them, but most of the time, really good improvisation is a learned skill. So that is another aspect of the Matt Mercer effect. Is he has 2 different routes to come at those skills. He has been a GM forever, and he's been an actor forever. So he has 2 different skill sets that lend directly into that. So, the rest of us, most of us, we were all just, playing D&D or in my case, GMing for the last 30 years. And I built that skill. And now, like, some of my players in my Wednesday night stream, they have their own stream on Sundays. Obliviously Adventurous on Facebook. Go check them out. They're wonderful. They had their own show on Sundays, and their GM, his nickname is Panda. He is a first-time GM. And they basically just spend Sunday night breaking him over and over and over again.
Oh, no.
And they were like... but they were like, they came up, they're like, we can break anybody. And I was I'm friends with them, and I get on some of their other streams when they play video games and stuff like that. And so I was like, you couldn't break me. There's absolutely no way you can break me. I was like, and they're like, oh, we can break anybody. So I threw together the Wednesday night game, and it's just the difference between that amount of experience is just right there. Because where in the other game, they're like gods and they run roughshod over everything. In my game, and they're only fifth level right now, but they're still, it doesn't matter because, Panda's a new GM. He plays by the rules. He follows everything to the T, and he tries to use that to win out his sessions. And I'm just like, one time we were in combat, and they were like, how many hit points does this guy had? And I said, as many as he needs. So it's like one of the...
Yeah. So one of the things I do when I approach a new table, especially with a new GM, and if one of my players, Alma, is watching, yes, I did this with you, if you didn't realize it, is I try to coach them a bit as a player. Not really like reminding them of rules, but like I'll like interject midstream. Or like my character will do something to help them out. So if you're an experienced dungeon master, and like you see they're kind of in the weeds, help them out in character as much as you can. Just help them out as much as you can, because it is a lot of mental labor to be a dungeon master. Because it's like I've had to explain to players before, you're playing one character and you're reacting to the other players and myself. I'm playing all the NPCs. I'm deciding how the world reacts to what you do. I'm running combat encounters. I'm, making sure that you have this enjoyable experience. I'm doing descriptions. I'm doing all these things, and I'm answering questions from everybody. Take what you're going through and multiply it by 10. That is what I have to go through. And so, what I highly suggest is that if you're an experienced player or DM and you see your DMs in the weeds, and especially if they're new, help them out a little bit. Just kind of like get in there and just be like, do something maybe out of character a little bit. Like with my DM in the Avernus game I brought up earlier, he built the encounter, and like when I heard him describe the encounter, he realized that the player who would be able to figure this out was not there. Like I saw it on his face, and I just interjected and said, like, "Hey, I'm a tactical player. This character's not tactical. It's just basically a murder toddler. I want to explain to everybody how we should handle this real quick." And like he told me, thank you. He goes, I would have wiped the table if you didn't handle it the way you did. He goes, and no one else would have known how to handle this. He goes, because you grew up in the tactical wargaming era of Dungeons and Dragons. He goes, this was for you and for Rob. He goes, but since you were there, he goes, I got to run the encounter I wanted to. He goes, the players felt all the tension of an old war game style encounter. He goes, and they were able to survive it because you were there to advise them. That also means DMs need to be a little bit willing to let players state things out of character about the way things should be handled.
Yep.
Going back to the idea of, again, Critical Role effect or Matthew Mercer effect, I love, like, obviously, and we were talking about it before, this idea of pulling the best from other artists, other DMs, other storytellers, and using those things in your games. And one of the things, as we're getting closer to the end of our conversation here, that I want to really drive home to anybody who's watching, who is a DM, is to figure out what is fun for you. And to rely on those things that are most fun for you. Because most likely, if they're fun for you, you're probably going to be pretty good at them. And that could be, maybe you want to become like let's say that combat is really enjoyable for you. Well, take that good skill that you have at combat and learn how to make it amazing. Not just like a good combat scenario, but learn words that describe combat well. Learn, dive into, make that thing that you think is fun, make it exceptional. Make that your thing. So players, even if they don't like combat, will enjoy combat when it's at your table. And if you can really lean into those things that you super enjoy, then you're going to have a successful game. Your players are going to enjoy themselves. If you're spending all your time worrying or apologizing to your table about those things that you are insecure about, nobody's going to have fun. It's not their job to make you feel better about your game. Like, have that confidence, do the things that are going to give you enjoyment and that you can really take as your own.
Yep. And Lavenderowski said, one tip that I'd have for new DMs is to play with different systems, branching out and trying narrative-based, classless systems. I found it helps players and DMs that are stuck on rules. And then she said, helps mitigate the issues of getting stuck on the thought process of, you got to do it exactly this way because the book says. And that is also another, we kind of covered it a little bit. That is another thing that a lot of entry-level GMs, new GMs actually get stuck on, because they're coming into an environment that has so many people like myself and Ian who are like walking fucking encyclopedias, and here's the other unfortunate part. There's plenty of people that are like me and Ian that have no problem bashing someone with those rules because they feel like that it's their responsibility to police the situation. And I do not. If I'm sitting at someone else's table, number one, I'm so fucking happy to be able to play a game for once that I'm just giddy. And number two, I'm sitting there and I'm like, if they do something I know is absolutely wrong, they've broken the rule, I just look at the back of the way I GM and I'm like, there's got to be a narrative reason for it. I don't care if they know the rule, don't know the rule. I'm going to accept what happens because I'm sitting at their table. They're putting forth the effort to do this for me. If I forget something at my tables, some of my players will remind me, some of my players won't, some of my players won't even notice. But the big thing is, all of them are going to respect the fact that, I'm running the game, and I rarely have people stop the game to try and correct me. But I have seen at other tables, players stop a game to try and correct a GM.
Well, and normally the way I handle that is if I don't know a rule, because one of the bad things about being a beardy player is I remember rules from 2nd edition, 3rd edition, 4th edition, 5th edition, and sometimes even rules from things that are not D&D. And like a situation will come up and I'll be like, I don't know the official ruling on this. Am I going to waste like 15 minutes looking up the rule in the DMG? Am I going to go search online for it? And I'll just do a system right there. I'll just be like, okay, this is the rule. This is how we're going to resolve this.
Yep.
And I believe this is fair, because one of the great things about the D20 system, and a lot of people don't like the D20 system, but I kind of do. The DCs are kind of baked in, and I can make consistent rulings based on those DCs and the way it's structured. There's generally ability score and skill, and I can just bake in consistent things like, how does this ruling work? I don't know, but I can make up something on the fly. And as long as I'm consistent with it, that's the most important thing, is consistency.
So your Smoke just said something funny. He says, nothing worse than mixing up a GURPS, Rollmaster, and Champions combat sequence in a Savage World game.
Oh my gosh.
And Ivy's here, and she redeemed Hydrate. Thank you for hydrating. And hi, Ivy.
I was gonna say, the purpose of rules is what? The purpose of rules is so that people feel the game is fair, right? So that the game is fair. So as a DM, if you are doing your best to rule things in a fair manner, then you're probably gonna get it right 95% of the time. It's as long as it feels fair, that is the most important thing. Because there are certain rules that you can go rule by rule by rule that just aren't fair. I mean, some of these combinations and min-maxing, multi-class nonsenses that you can do with some of these builds makes no logical sense at all. But it's technically by the rules, but it makes no sense. It seems very unfair. So we need to know that rules are there to help the players and the DM feel like they're on the same playing field, that physics works, that that it feels fair. Does this feel fair? Yeah, okay, great. Then you're doing good. That's what the rules are there for.
Absolutely. They're there to provide a structure and a level playing field. That's it. That's all.
Yeah.
And if ever you get to a point where a rule is failing you, then you either remove it or change it. I mean, the evolution of D&D was homebrew. Their first attempt was all homebrew, and then from there they just kept on homebrewing.
That's very apparent in 2nd edition.
Oh yeah.
Nothing is consistent in that system, which is one of the reasons why I love the D20 system with 3rd edition, because everything was consistent. It was like, oh my god, they got a professional game designer here. Because I remember Thaco, okay?
Yeah.
Ooh yeah, Thaco. Good stuff.
But one of the great things about D&D and tabletop RPGs in general, and what I suggest every budding GM does, go pick up a copy of Paranoia.
Yeah. God, I love
Paranoia
that game.
is, you can play Paranoia. The best game of Paranoia I had was when we were in Austin and we were driving away from 6th Street. This is when I was much younger. And I was just driving and I just started a game of Paranoia in the car. Nobody rolled any dice. Nobody did anything. We were just talking like we were in character. Questions aren't allowed at this time. Frank Computer says, please redeem yourself to the closest suicide booth and start again. And it was just that for an hour drive back to Fort Hood, Texas. So, I mean, pick up other game systems and learn things from there. Because even though I know at the beginning of the stream, we bashed 4th edition a little bit. One of the things I loved from 4th edition, and I carry on into this edition, was skill challenges.
Oh, yeah.
I love skill challenges, and I love setting that out to the players. Okay, this is the situation. You tell me what skill you want to use in order to get out of this, and let's roll it. I'll decide the DC. I'll set the DC based on the skill you're telling me, and we'll see if it actually works. And like it makes the players think about their skills, because especially a lot in D&D, the people think about their spells, their combat abilities, but like your character has this skill set that's a major part of their background and a major part of their class. So let's highlight that a little bit.
Random
and just
tools.
Oh yeah, like you know the poor artificer who has no athletics and no acrobatics. How is he going to handle this avalanche that they're in? What is he going to do? You know, and like he comes up with a skill and imaginative way to use it, and the group has to pass a check, and then they go on. Which don't be afraid to pull rules from older editions or other games, because they work quite well for a reason.
Absolutely.
Still steal from everybody.
Yep. Sell Your Smoke kind of had another a point to this. He said it's important to remember some game systems rules are there to invoke a specific feel of play. While ignoring them is okay, sometimes you should also follow them.
Absolutely.
And there is some definite credence to that, because there are some like oh god, what's the name of it? Crimson Skies. It's a mini game, but it's so detailed that it might as well be an RPG. I mean, there's lore in it, there's mechanics in it for just about everything. But you know, the big thing about it is that, you know, it's become so detailed and built out that like there's almost a rule for just about everything. So when you have something that's that mechanically based and that well laid out, you can kind of sit there and go, well, I could make something up, but this fits, or that fits, or this will work. You know, so if you have a rule set that can work for it, and your people you're playing with are playing in that rule set, you should try and stick to it, because it does create less of a situation for someone to feel like things may be manipulating, and like Weston was saying, things might be seeming a little unfair because suddenly the same rules are not applying to everyone. So if you can stick within the rule sets, do. But there are points where rule sets don't cover what you need.
Well, and again, that's kind of pulling back the screen a little bit, or actually I shouldn't say pulling back the screen, but making the screen taller. Because like that min-max player may know that they can take out the Ancient Red Dragon in 2 rounds, but you know, there also has to be that understanding of like, hey, it's no fun to watch Superman beat everybody up. So let's let everybody else have a chance to be a hero too. So while you want to introduce fairness, you also want to introduce for everybody to be a hero. Yeah. So I mean, that's, you know, there's a reason why people like the Avengers better than the Justice League, because not everybody wants to watch Superman beat everybody up. So.
And I think another big thing.
But yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was thinking another. I think another big thing about what the Matthew Mercer effect brings forward for a lot of people is, you know, it points out that yes, there is a difference, and this is something that's very important to clarify. There is an absolute difference between a professionally funded, professionally, you know, built out live streaming game on the internet that is, you know, has all this production value to it, and then has gone out and found some of the best actors and players that they can for this, and going up to the hobby shop on a Friday night, sitting down with 6 or 7 complete strangers and trying to create a story. You know, there really shouldn't be that comparison at all.
I mean, it's kind of like to pull a little bit, you know, it's kind of like if you like to rebuild cars, it's like comparing your stuff to the guys on TLC who all they do is rebuild cars. Mm-hmm. You know, that's a professional business. They have all the contacts to make that good. If you just want to paint and rebuild your 72 Camaro in your garage, don't get upset when Counts Customs does it better than you, because that's his job. Just enjoy the process. Yep. You know, and I think it kind of also leans in on, you know, one of the things, you know, that I think we could take from this as we could turn it into a positive for Critical Role to encourage everybody to create more, because the world's better when more people create things. I think everybody can agree to that. So like, one of my players, one of my former players, he's very much facing the Mercer effect right now because COVID's lifting. He's bringing people together. He's running a few sessions. And he's like, they keep on expecting something of me because, like, I brought out my Reaper minis and they're not painted. And, I feel that they're a little disappointed. I was like, well, are any of your players artistic? And he's like, well, yeah, one of them's an artist. And, she's mentioned she likes to paint miniatures. I was like, well, then hand her a bunch of miniatures and say, hey, could you paint these for me on Saturday?
Absolutely.
I'm colorblind, and like, it's just, again, of bringing the players in to create something together,
Absolutely. Yeah. And Matthew Mercer has a production team and everything like that. All these shows do. But remember, if you have a table of talented, creative people who are getting together with you, all of you can contribute towards the experience. Like Ian was saying, all of you can lend in to making the quality of the game go up.
And even Matt Mercer's not alone in the quality of that game, even when you look at it from what we see. Because, like, who's basically the art director for that show? Who's the one who organizes the fan art and everything else like that, gets it together? It
was Liam, but I don't know who it is now.
It's still Liam. Liam and Taliesin are involved in that. Who's the one who handles all the back end logistics, which is generally Marisha. So there's a lot of people involved in the creation of Critical Role, and I think the best lesson we can take for that and how we can use the Critical Role or Matt Mercer effect or whatever you want to talk for ourselves is to kind of encourage players to realize that we're all creating this thing together. If you're coming to the game expecting me to entertain you for 4 hours, you've got the wrong idea. This is a place where we all entertain each other for 4 hours.
Yeah. And that brings up one last thing about the Matt Mercer effect. Because people are, GMs are the ones who are the main ones bringing this up. And the biggest thing the Matt Mercer effect can do that hurts our community, not that it does, but that people who dwell on this concept do, is it can shatter people's confidence. Because they're feeling like they're not living up to some idealized goal that is not realistic. We need to be, as a community, to rail behind these new GMs, and let them know that they're the time and effort they're putting forth is appreciated. There is no way that we should let anyone who is putting forth a sacrifice to run a game for their friends not go without that knowledge that what they're doing is appreciated and that they are basically putting out a sacrifice, and that it is a gift that is being accepted with all the with humbleness and with love and respect, because it is a sacrifice. Even if you're a lazy GM, it's still a sacrifice. All right, so I think that we've pretty much beaten this horse all the way to death. And I think that the basic gist is that, the Matt Mercer effect is only as real and as valid as you let it be. I mean, in the end, what we do as DMs can only really be quantified by the people at our table and whether or not they're enjoying what's happening. And, that is something that is the ultimate litmus test of what's going on. If the people at your table are enjoying the game and enjoying what you've put out there, there's your answer. You don't need to look at any other, you don't need to look at a stream show, or you don't need to look at other GMs on the other tables. In the end, if they're having a good time, that's all that matters. Well, one other thing matters. You need to have a good time. DMs who get stressed out and start worrying and thinking that they're doing it all wrong, it ends up crushing their love for the game. So you need to understand that what you're doing is always going to be enough, that everything you put forth is going to be appreciated, and that you guys are, doing some great service for your friends, and some great service for strangers. and that you're making some people happy.
I think great art is meant to inspire people, right? It's not meant to discourage more art from being made, and that's really up to the individual. Like if you think Critical Role is discouraging, that's on you. You know, that's not on anybody else. I mean, objectively, it's an example of great art, where you have all these professionals doing what they do. And so we can either choose to be inspired by the good things that they do, or we can let those things, harm us and make us not want to do it at all, which I hope is not the case. But good art should inspire us to also create good art.
Absolutely. And speaking of getting inspired, since we're getting ready to wrap up for the night, first off, once again, I want to thank Weston and I want to thank Ian for being part of this tonight. I really appreciate it because this was a great conversation. I cannot even begin to thank you enough for coming in here and sharing everything with us. You can find Weston at his links, if I could type. There it is. It just took a little while to come up. You can find Weston at his links here, and you'll find all his creations that he makes. He puts out amazing music, and for those of you who don't know, he actually lets people use his music for free, both in their games. So if you need music, theme music for games or anything like that, go check out his Patreon page. There is links there to download the music for free. You do not have to support him, but Dinner and a Game completely supports Arcane Anthems, and we fully endorse them. The music he puts out is amazing. We're gonna start using it on our shows because how can you not? Someone who puts that much love into the creativity, you have to honor that, and we will. So if you want to follow Weston, you can go hit those links up there. And also, he's also kind of amazing on TikTok because,
I have a lot of fun on TikTok. TikTok is silly and wonderful, and I love it. If you want to see me be goofy, you go to my TikTok.
Yeah. I would say you're almost like the Weird Al Yankovic of D&D.
Yeah.
All right.
Goals. Hashtag goals.
And if you want to follow Ian also has a TikTok account. He talks about D&D content, and he talks about social reform. It is very incredible content, and I love him for doing it because he does things that I cannot, and I still can't type because my fingers are fat and stupid. But if you want to find Ian, you can find him on TikTok, and I'm going to put the link up as soon as I figure out where my fingers went. Oh, that's why. I actually misspelt the link in the command. That's wonderful. But anyway, you can find Ian here on TikTok, and if you want to follow Dinner and a Game, you can go to our link tree here, and you can find us all of our links for all of our content. Remember, small creators need your love in order to grow their fan base, and in order to give them more chances to get their content out there. If you like it, share it. It's the biggest thing you can do for us. And in that thought, we are going to share our love with someone else. So I am going to take us over to another stream, and this is inspired by something you said earlier, Weston. You were talking about having being dyslexic and how gaming has been intimidating because it's so much to read. Well, the person we're going to read, her name is Alex, and her channel is Axelbaum. Alex Baum. She actually has incredibly severe dyslexia.
We're almost done.
Ian unmuted. But yeah, she has incredibly severe dyslexia to the point where she was told in second grade she would probably never be able to read. And she has taught herself how to play D&D and everything like that. She is an incredible advocate for people with these issues, and she put out a TikTok just today about it. It was incredible and moving. So go in there and show her some love. Give her a follow if you have not. They have streaming games. She comes on and she gives DMing advice. She's an incredible creator, and show her some love and tell her D&D Game sent you. And other than that, come back and join us on Wednesday night is our next game, which is going to be our Is that right? Yes. Wednesday night is our next game, and it's going to be Kingdoms of Mist, which is our D&D 5e homebrew. And then Thursday night is going to be the first game of our City of Mist campaign, which we have not named yet. We're still trying to figure that out. So, and next Friday night, we have the Lab Experiments in Gaming, who will be on here continuing their live play of Fall of Magic with the game's creator, Ross Cowman, from Heart of the Deer Unicorn Studios. It's been an amazing game. We're almost to the point where we're getting ready to wrap it up, so it's been an incredible ride. Please come in and join us. And also, remember, go follow Weston, go follow Ian, and follow all the creators because, you know, we're doing this for you guys, and we love to hear your comments. We love to hear your opinions. And in the meantime, we're going to go and show someone else some love. Thank everyone again, and hope you all have a very good weekend. Enjoy the holiday. Ian and Weston, again, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Okay, we are clear.